Welcome to First Federated Church's online video podcast of this week's sermon. First Federated Church is based out of Des Moines, Iowa. Please visit www.firstfederated.org for more information.
Well, I want to begin this morning with a question, and the question is this: where were you and what were you doing on January the 22nd, 1973?
I was one.
January the 22nd, 1973. I was 12 years old, right? And I was a sixth grader at Scott Tays Elementary School in Scott Tays, West Virginia. How many of you know where that's at? I didn't think anybody would. And you know, on that day, I'm sure that we were in class, probably. I had no idea of the significance of what that day would hold or what was going on. It's the day where our Supreme Court rendered its ruling that allowed abortion on demand to become the law of the land. Now, since that day, I'm told that there have been an estimated 56 million babies who have had their lives terminated before they could even be born. In the 42 years since that ruling, the topic of abortion has become a hot-button issue and has violently divided our nation and even our churches into two primary camps. There is the camp that calls itself pro-life, the camp that calls itself pro-choice. Both camps have made the issue into a political one. Both camps claim that their arguments are moral. And it is true that both camps have politicized it, and there are moral arguments that are being made on both sides of the issue. For me personally, the issue is bigger, though, than politics, bigger than even morality. For me, I see it as a God issue. I see it as a God issue, and the point of view that informs my point of view about the entire topic are not the arguments that get made by the right or the left, nor about what the legal authority of our land says is okay or not okay. Personally, I'm more interested in what does God have to say about the issue. And here's why that's so important to me. It's important to me because fundamentally I believe that He is the creator and the sustainer of all life. And if He's the creator and sustainer of all life, then He reserves to Himself the right to say what life will be. He has the right then to determine when it comes. He has the right to determine when it goes. And we must then follow His directives. Well, today, as advertised, we have with us a special guest, and that is Tim Overland. Tim is the executive director of Personhood Iowa, and he's here today to help us talk about that issue. So let's make Tim welcome. Can we do that? Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, somebody really likes you over there, Tim.
Checks in the mail, Danny.
Checks in the mail. Well, I'm eager to get into the topic, but before we do, I want you to know a little bit more about Tim and a little bit more about the organization that he's presently providing leadership for. So, Tim, the first question really is this: what is Personhood Iowa, and why does it exist?
Well, Personhood Iowa is, and as a teaser, there's little cards out on the table in the back. When you get done, my wife will be out there, and I'll try to be out there. But basically what our organization is, or what we believe, is that all life is created equal. We have value, and there should be no exception to that. And basically, as we speak in the church today, it's as Christians that's something that we actually need to live out, is that belief. As far as why we exist, again, that is also on the card. But summarize briefly that we want to create and foster a culture of life in the church. The first step, Pastor Mike talked about politics and all that stuff, and sadly we do that a lot. The first one alludes to that, and that's to promote public policy that defines a person as a person from the moment of conception until natural death.
Okay, and I want to stop there.
Okay.
Because I want to make sure that people hear what you just said and it doesn't just go past their ears. So oftentimes when I'm up here preaching, I find that things I say go past their ears, right? And so I want to stop here for just a second, make sure it doesn't get past their ears. You said that you're looking to promote public policy that defines a person as a person from the moment of conception to natural death.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's unique because it seems like so many times in this whole topic of right to life and all of that, that the focus is on just the conception or just upon the birth of the baby. And then many times it seems like folks just kind of are satisfied if that happens, they go on their merry way. But yet there are issues that have sprung over the 42 years since that decision has been made that literally now is even threatening life in the aged, in the older population.
Absolutely. I spent all day yesterday surrounded by political types, so I'll try to keep that talk to a minimum, but it may have seeped in. But just this week there was a bill proposed in the Senate, I believe Iowa Senate, called Dignity with Death, or Death with Dignity. And I mean, I believe those are contradictions of terms, but, and we'll get into this a little bit later, I think is one of the driving forces behind this was my dad's fight with cancer and ultimately going home to be with the Lord. And through all of that, you start hearing a lot of the same arguments now being applied that we've taught for 2 generations, that if a life's inconvenient, if it's going to suffer, whatever that means, I don't know if anybody has quality of life, those type of things. All these things that are really hard to define that we really shouldn't be, but they're using the same arguments at the end of life. And as I've looked in the mirror and noticed more gray in my beard, I guess I'm closer to that end, so I need to worry about that as well.
Yeah. So one of the reasons you exist is to promote public policy. What are the other ones?
This one, and I think, is the most important one, and that is we want to activate local churches and believers in the state of Iowa, and we're Personhood Iowa, so we're all over the state, to live out their convictions. We want to educate, we want to impact the community through that, and which kind of leads to the next step also is we create relationships with ministries all over the place. Been blessed to meet people in some fabulous places, things I don't necessarily have the expertise, nor do I want to do. I don't want to run a pregnancy center. I don't want to run a maternity home or a hospice center or any of those type of things. We want to utilize those ministries that are already doing the deal, that are already the experts, and we want to help aid folks that have made that choice for life. And then also, again, as Pastor Mike just alluded to, care for the living also. We're not just pro-birth, we're also fully pro-life.
Okay, all right. So summarizing then?
Yeah, to summarize, we want to defend every human life, and through education, legislation, and service, which I think is critical, make the killing of the preborn, and then also the aged or sick or fill in the blank there. We want to make that unthinkable and totally unnecessary.
Very good. Well, that tells us a little bit about the organization that you're leading and why it's there. Let's learn a little bit about you personally. I think on the screen should be coming up a picture of your family. Introduce us to your family.
Yes, absolutely. So in the center, you'll see my lovely wife, who will be at the table in the back. That's Jazz. She's a teacher in West Des Moines. My daughter there in the front, Whitney, is 19 and goes to college in Ohio, and I think we'll be watching the next service, hopefully, if she's up. She's a college student, so that's maybe not. And then my son on the right is TJ, and you'll see him in here from time to time, and I think he'll be at the next service as well.
Now, I think what many people don't know is that Tim is a member of First Federated Church. He attends here every weekend, and actually the offices for Personhood Iowa are right here in our facility on the second floor, just above this auditorium. So that's just something to throw in there. Now, another thing that I think that the folks ought to know about you is how you became a crusader for life. I mean, this is not something you've always done. For many years, you were pursuing a more, I don't know, what you would call regular career scheme or whatever, but something obviously kind of interrupted that and caused you to make a major change. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how that took place?
I alluded to it earlier. About 6 years ago, my dad called me and said, there's Dad with my niece and one of my brothers. I have 4 brothers. And this is Dad after he's been back home. But he called me about 6 years ago, roughly, and said, I've got a little cancer. We're known to downplay those things in our family, but ultimately it turned out to be more than that. But really, it was kind of merging of things, I guess. With Dad being sick, I was also introduced to Men's Fraternity, which is a class that we host here for men that I highly recommend to every guy. Those two things kind of came together, and I was always raised, on the the American dream was all about capitalism, and we've talked about that in here, I guess, over the last few weeks, is having more stuff and all that, and I really started evaluating what does that mean, and men's fraternity really talks a lot about your legacy and expecting those type of things, and through all that, it just kind of culminated all together, and what's the question we always ask, right? What does life mean, or what's the meaning of your life? And so I got just thinking about things, and as I said, I've got 4 brothers. We do a lot of arguing in our family, so I was pretty adept at that, being the oldest, and would, jump onto things and argue, and for whatever reason, I started thinking about the unborn, and then also the end-of-life issues, because that was right in my face with my dad. Through that, as I started becoming more and more vocal, I learned of, just without even trying, I learned of 3 women just in my family who have been affected by abortion, and have, gone on different directions, but, have been affected in different ways. And, more and more I thought about that as, these are women, generally younger women, that are they're sold this bill of goods. They're told that this is a quick fix, let's just deal with this. And now I'm starting to see how that has affected those women and how that's affected different people. So ultimately it came down to, I don't want to see anybody else go through that. And I don't want to have people trying to fix that. We've got a huge number. Mike said the number is 56 million. It's a massive number of women and men that are going to need some healing. So that was kind of the thing, is that has to stop. How can we stop that? About that time, as I was looking for things to do, this door of opportunity opened up. We started, I had an idea for a radio segment for somebody else to do, turned into a radio show that we did for almost 2 years, that was hosted by someone else, Rebecca Maxwell, hosted that, and we met all these great ministries and all these people and stories, and I think that's where we make a huge impact. But that ultimately transitioned into Personhood Iowa, and we wanted to take those ministries and introduce them to churches and to the public. So,
all right. Well, as most of you know, January for years now has been set aside as Right to Life Month, and there's a Right to Life Sunday that many churches participate in, and I think officially on the calendar that was last Sunday, but we had other things going on, so we chose this week to remember that and bring that whole issue back to the forefront. And so Tim, in conjunction with that, then made the decision to give you an opportunity to speak to this church, all 3 services. So you have the floor, and you're here to give us a message. What is it ultimately that you want to say to these people?
The bottom line, we could say it real quick and then go home, I guess, is that human life is sacred. We obviously want to expand on that a little bit, but ultimately that human life is sacred. And again, as I just said a few minutes ago, we've been learning for the last several weeks that we should have margin in our life, and we should be available. And we're talking to Christians in today, and I think that's important. And for us as Christians, it's not enough just to have the right opinions on something. The video that we showed before, if you were able to follow along with that, it's not just about, well, I think I'm pro-life, but we actually have a responsibility to do something with that and to actually fight for life.
Okay. Yeah, so I want to stop again, make sure their ears heard that.
Okay.
So based on, for those who have been around for the last few weeks, we've talked about margin and the whole concept of having breathing room so that you're available to God to do various things that He may lead or call you to do. You're coming back from that and saying then that as Christians, it's not enough just to have the right belief or the right opinion, but that right opinion should drive some kind of action and some kind of involvement, right?
Yeah.
And as you say that reminds me of a passage in James chapter 1 where James exhorts us not to be just hearers of the word, but to be doers, right? So the truth that we receive into our heart should have some mechanism at some point that drives us to be involved. And that's what you're saying there, that many believers may have the right stand on this issue or the right belief about life, but many are unengaged and we need to be engaged.
Well, one of the questions I always thought about was, we say we're Christian. Generally, we would say we were pro-life. Most of us would say that. Prove it. I mean, it comes down to just what you said. We're to be known by the fruit, by our fruit. So at this point, too, I kind of want to stop. Again, I was around a lot of politicians yesterday, and everybody has their issue, and everybody wants to check off all their issues. We know there are other issues out there. We think ultimately, though, that this is the fundamental issue, because if we don't get this one right and you don't have life, the rest of the issues ultimately don't matter. So this to me is fundamental. I don't know if that's being egotistical or not, or being the issue that I think, but I think that's fundamental. And the other part of that is too, we don't want to minimize. A lot of times we as pro-lifers or whatever, fill in the blank title you want to put on us, label, that we're heartless, we don't care. What would you do if you were in that situation? And so that's the argument. So we don't want to minimize that teenager that finds herself pregnant. She's bought into the lie, or is looking for love, doesn't have the father in the home, or whatever the case may be. We don't want to minimize that situation. We don't want to minimize the college student who finds herself pregnant, she thinks, oh, I can't pursue my career, or whatever that reason is. Maybe a couple learns that their baby has Down syndrome, or whatever. There's a myriad of things they can test for. There's one of the toughest ones, and trust me, this is one you hear a lot, the tragedy of a rape victim. She didn't choose this time to be a mother. She surely didn't choose that person. So, and then as we've been alluding to, the end of life. And this, for whatever reason, we've imparted into our society that older people, I don't want to be a burden, or I don't want to, these things that my gosh, we should never tell our parents or let our parents think that they're going to be a burden. I think that's a horrible notion. So we don't want to minimize any of those issues. In fact, we think that God can do some amazing things through those things. And my mom always told me 2 wrongs don't make a right. So we want to try to make, we want to show that there's some good that can come out of that. And ultimately, the reason we think that is, because as Mike said, God is the giver of life, and we don't get to play God. We don't get to pick and choose when that happens.
And so I think it's important that you hear that those who are on the pro-life or life side, we should not minimize all of those complicating factors. They're real. They are devastating in the life of the people in whom they find themselves. But despite that, it doesn't change the fact that life is sacred, and that's what we're here to talk about. Mm-hmm. So probably most of the people sitting here already agree with that, right? Probably. But there may be some who are on the fence. There may be some who even would disagree, and if that's where they're at, that's fine. I mean, we're allowed to form our own opinions about things. But what I think we should do now is to bring to the table, why is life sacred? For you, why do you say life is sacred?
Well, let's throw the caveat out there first. As Mike kind of alluded to, maybe you're an atheist, maybe you're an agnostic, maybe you haven't been convinced on this issue. I can't speak to that. All I can speak to is where I'm at and where I think we as Christians are, or where we should be, and that we need to go to the source, and that's God and His Word. If you've ever been to a march, if you've ever done the prayer chain, if you've ever done any of those, you've probably seen certain verses that pop up fairly frequently. Some of these, I'll just summarize these. Psalm 139, talks about God knowing us before we were born. He formed our inward parts, wove me in my mother's womb. Jeremiah 1 is talking about knowing Jeremiah again before he was born. Luke 1 is for most of us, I think, know the story of when Mary comes into the room with Elizabeth, and John leaps with joy in her belly, and it speaks to that, to that life being there. So those are very common, and there's many, many more, but those are very common. And we've really kind of been thinking about this from a different perspective, and it's one that maybe you haven't thought about before. If you go into Genesis 1, in the verses between 20 and 25, it talks about God making all the other critters and sending them on their duties of grazing and multiplying and those kind of things. But we want to look at Genesis 2:7.
Yeah. So the screen, it's going to pop up here on the screen. If you brought a Bible, you might want to open it up to Genesis 2:7 and take a look at it as well. And so, Tim, why don't you just read that verse to us, then we'll talk about it.
I'll read it off the screen. I think it's a slightly different version.
Yeah.
So, then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. He breathed the breath of life into the man's nostrils, and the man became a living person.
Just take a moment to look at that verse on the screen, would you? And to think about what it communicates. Now, unless you've studied Hebrew or you're opening up a Hebrew text, you're not going to catch the full meaning of what's being said here. So I want to hit you up with that because it's what puts all of the weight behind this topic. It says that God formed man from the dust of the ground. Now, remember in Genesis chapter 1, after he makes all of the different critters, the fish, the birds, the cattle, what else? Insects, right? You got plant life. I mean, we got all kinds of different life that God makes, and he makes it how? He makes it by just speaking it into existence. He just wills it to be there, and it's there. And then when we get to the end of that creative order, we find in Genesis 1:26 where God says, let us make man in our image. And then we transition over to chapter 2, and it goes back through the summary again, and it tells us how God actually made mankind, how he made humanity. He reached into the dust of the ground, and he personally formed a body. Now I want you to think about that for a moment, because he didn't do that with the cows. He didn't do that with the dogs and the cats, or the birds, or the fish, or the ants, or the praying mantises. Right? He just willed them to be, and they were, and they had life. He's the source, and they had life. But when it came to humanity, going to be made in his image, he becomes much more intimate. He becomes much more deliberate. He becomes much more involved by literally making the elements that will create that body. And then we can imagine, as we think about this, that there perhaps laying on the ground is a human body. Try to imagine that, if you will. I can only imagine that he was probably wearing his birthday suit, right? And so imagine, there he is. He's just laying there, the man. But there's no life yet. But then God breathes into the nostrils of that body the breath of life. And here's where that Hebrew text comes into play. And it says there that the man became a living nephesh, which means soul. The dogs didn't have a soul. The cows don't have a soul. The birds don't have a soul. The praying mantises don't have a soul, but the man has a soul. His life, in some mysterious, mystical, not fully fathomable way from our ability to understand, God breathes, in essence, some of his personal life into the man and the woman become like him in his image. And so when we think about this importance of life, this issue of life, I mean, this really becomes the fundamental argument, doesn't it? This becomes the fundamental issue. Because, folks, listen to me carefully and soak this in and think about it. If humanity is no different from the dog or the cow or the sheep or the praying mantis, then what's the issue here? There is no issue. Then let us do whatever we choose to do. But if man is fundamentally different, and that fundamental difference is the life that God shared with us, that in part explains what it means to be made in his image, then this issue becomes fundamental and becomes extremely important. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what we would say makes us, unique, different, and distinct. It goes to the nature of evolution and all that kind of stuff. If we can cheapen life, then we can do whatever we want. Otherwise, why are we here?
Yeah, and so I would encourage you, man, get this down, because look, when you're in a conversation somewhere, sometime, and someday yet to come, and someone's talking to you about this whole concept and they're saying whatever, and you have the desire to throw in your 2 cents. Your 2 cents are pretty much worthless if you're not basing it on this right here. Because this is the fundamental issue. This is what it's all about. So we're running out of time, Tim. What is Personhood Iowa doing then to propagate this message?
Sure.
What is Personhood Iowa doing to promote and protect life?
Well, as Mike just said, in that the discussion that you would be having, we're talking to Christians at this point. So this is where I don't care about the politics. I don't care what party you're registered with. What Personhood Iowa wants to do is we want to get into the church. Apparently there's 4,400 churches around the state of Iowa, 420 or so in the Des Moines area. So we want to get in and meet the churches and communicate this message that we're talking about today. And we build relationships with ministries outside of outside of us, again, as I said. So the Informed Choices, Ruth Harbor, Beauty Amidst the Ashes, Restored by Grace, which I think is a critical aspect of this when it comes to healing from being post-abortive, and we could talk about that. So we want to, so we're doing that. We also have the podcast that I alluded to at liferightnow.net, where we've got almost 2 years worth of material there. So we think that we need to have a posture in the church of a lot more of this, a lot more of love towards all of those people we just talked about, the pregnant teen, the post-abortive woman, all of those. John just talked about the Stevens ministers. I mean, things like that are, I think, crucially important for us.
Yeah. And you just kind of, I know you're not as demonstrative as I am, so let me be demonstrative for the group so they really get it. You know, folks, honestly, the church of which I'm a representative, right? So often, what do we do with those people who find themselves in a pregnancy that they didn't plan on, that's complicated, that's, fraught with all the issues that would tempt them maybe to go and get an abortion? What is our usual posture toward those people? It's one like this. We just kind of stiff-arm them. Oh, you're an immoral young woman. Shame on you. Or whatever. Of course, we always forget about the guy who was involved, right? But I mean, she's the one carrying the child. So shame on you. And what he's saying is the church ought to be more like this. And we're not condoning. What we're saying is, hey, okay, you find yourself in a bad spot. We have some answers. We can introduce you to someone who loves you and cares for you. We've got solutions that can enhance your life rather than hurt it further. And honestly, think about that. And we as a church, what is our position? What is our posture? Are we like this? Or are we like this? And this is the way we ought to be, is, hey, this is a safe place. We want to help you. We want to love. We want to encourage you to get on the right track and do the right things. And we want to be there through the different issues. So let's wrap it up with this. How can we then be involved, both individually and corporately as a church? What are some things that we could do maybe to be involved in the cause?
One, stop out at the table out front. We've got a group that meets here every Monday night at 7 o'clock. We're meeting right now. We're in the conference room across from the office, calling ourselves Personhood FFC. So one, join that, and we're going to introduce you to these ministries. We've got things, we're coming up with a woman's health care guide, so you never have to go to Planned Parenthood or anything along that lines to receive some of the services that they supposedly provide. Baby bottle blessing. Charlie is a mobile pregnancy center that will be in town this spring. We're going to try to do a big deal and introduce him to everybody, but it's a bus that can go around. It has a ultrasound and those type of things in it. So we're meeting those girls where they're at. And then always donations. We're set up to where we can run pretty lean and mean, but we still need money. We do ask, if you do that, please don't think that that's all. We want people to be more involved. Writing the checks are great, but there's more we can do, and if we do that, as Mike said, corporately, how we can leverage ourselves is phenomenal, and we can do a lot more.
And you know what? Here, let me do this real quick. So when you leave this morning, we want you to stop by the table there in the back and pick up one of these cards, Personhood Iowa, And on the back, there's some information there about how to be involved and things that you can do. And you know what? And just to kind of make it, enticing for you to do that, if you'll stop back there, we have some of these Chick-fil-A free sandwich, tokens. You can get a free, Hey, we're not above bribing you to help out.
We've seen that you like Chick-fil-A with
Chick-fil-A,
your picture
you saw me
with the
on
cow.
Facebook with my picture with the Chick-fil-A cow, didn't you? If you didn't, you need to become my friend so you can take a look at that, because I'm pretty proud of that. That's an awesome thing. So look, we're going to conclude with prayer. Tim, tell us 2 or 3 ways that we can pray ongoing for you and this cause.
First off is just for me, the board, and our families, we're going to take slings and arrows, and a lot of times that's just from our friendly flank. So we know we're going to get it from the other side as we become more and more effective. And then ultimately the message that we're spreading gets out there, that it's not about politics, it's about love and what the church should be doing and what we can do to make this issue. So, and that we're ultimately honoring him, and that we're doing it in such a way.
All right. Well, let's join together in prayer as we close out this session. Father, I thank you for Tim. I thank you for the life that you've given him, the family you've given him. Lord, the experiences that have driven him to the place of seeing a path that you are laying out for him to be engaged in this fight, in this cause. And Lord, for the passion and the open doors that you've provided. I pray that you will protect him, protect his emotions, protect his heart, his soul, his physical person, for his family as well, because Lord, we know that when we do battle against the evil one and against this evil age, that there's bound to be skirmishes that come that bring hurt and harm. And I pray that you would protect him from that and give him the spiritual authority and strength to stand up against that and to deal with these issues from a Christ-like perspective. Lord, I pray for Personhood Iowa that you would increase their influence. Lord, broaden their base. I pray that you would enable them to be on the front line and really doing good to help people who are dealing with these issues firsthand to find the positive answers and solutions that take them in the right way and not in a more harmful way. God, help us as a church to be concerned about this, to realize that it's more than just standing on a street corner with a sign or writing a check or voting for a politician, though all of those things may have their place. But Lord, we need to be active every day, all throughout a year, reaching out to people, loving them, caring for them, encouraging them, even providing assistance and help in their time of need. Lord, help us to be a church that really is about life, that adds value to the lives of those who live in this community, but also brings to them, through your gospel, the gift of eternal life. And I thank you for this opportunity to share these things, and may we follow your leadership in this in the days to come. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Hey, thank you for coming out today. Next Sunday, 9 o'clock, 10:30. We'll look forward to seeing you in one of those services. God bless.